war in Ukraine, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says the U.S. will give Ukraine cluster munitions. Speaking to reporters a short time ago, Sullivan said the U.S. had little choice because of the strength of weapons Russia is using on Ukraine. Cluster bombs are banned by more than 100 countries over concerns about their impact on civilians. Here's just some of what Sullivan had to say earlier to reporters.
The bottom line is this. We recognize that cluster munitions create a risk of civilian harm from unexploded ordnance. This is why we've deferred the decision for as long as we could. But there is also a massive risk of civilian harm if Russian troops and tanks roll over Ukrainian positions and take more Ukrainian territory and subjugate more Ukrainian civilians.
Sullivan added that Russia is using these cluster munitions to attack Ukraine, and Ukraine is using them to protect its citizens. To discuss this now, I want to bring in ABC News national security and defense analyst and retired CIA paramilitary operations officer Mick Mulroy. So, Mick, we just heard from U.S. officials on this decision to provide cluster bombs to Ukraine from its stockpile. This is a major decision, right? And it doesn't come without risk.
That's true, Alexis. There's a reason why so many countries want to ban these weapons. They do. The dud rate, so those are the bomblets that don't explode, can cause injury and death for many decades after they're used. That said, the countries that have banned them don't actually have them. And of course, they were not invaded by Russia like Ukraine was. Ukraine wants to use these in their own country, and they realize the risk. They are effective. They can be used against enemy positions in the defense, both personnel and armor, and they can be used to help protect your flank, so to speak, because you can drop minefields, essentially. And in a position where the Ukrainians will be launching major attacks against defended positions, they need to be able to protect their flank. So there's a very real military purpose for these weapons. They are bad, but it's obvious that Ukraine weighed that into the calculation when they requested them.
And Russia, of course, has these cluster bombs. We've been talking about it all day. They've used them to attack Ukraine on multiple occasions. The White House is saying that the stockpile we're providing is different, though, because they're encased in artillery shells. What do you make of that? What does that really mean?
So our dud rate is around 5%. So you could shoot one of these munitions and it'll shoot out up to a million, not a million, but they coverage about 7 square acres. 5% of them are dud rates when it comes to us. From the Russians, 40% are dud rates. So that shows you just how many of these submunitions you're going to have to pick up when this is all done. And the Russians, by most calculations, have already had about 30 to 40 million of these submunitions spread around Ukraine with about a 40% dead rate. So you could do the math on that. This is going to take a decade or more to be able to clean up. So the Ukrainians adding to that is significant, but it's important for their defense, and it's going to have to be cleaned up anyway. And I think National Security Advisor Sullivan made that point very specifically.
And talk to us about the timing of this decision. You know, why now? Why is the U.S. willing to send cluster munitions at this time in the war?
So I think there's two major factors. One, we are having a hard time keeping up with the artillery rounds the Ukrainians need to soften the Russian defenses so that they can probe and take back key terrain. That's one. So these could be used to kind of expand the scope of artillery effectiveness. And the other is the Ukrainians are making progress, but it's incremental. And they're now looking at a significant mobilization of Russians soldiers on their northern flank, and they might need to slow them down if they are committed to the battle. So this type of munitions, although it is problematic, do provide a significant military tactical advantage in many cases. And I think that's why the Ukrainians want them so badly. And they have, again, they have decided that it is worth using these type of munitions on their own territory and all the risks that come with that, because they are in an existential threat from Russia that Ukraine won't exist if they don't, if they're not successful there.
And Mick, just lay out for us what the addition of these cluster bombs to Ukrainian forces mean for the civilians. What impact will this have on them?
So when it comes to the Russian use of these cluster bombs, they've used them in and around civilian areas. That is a significant threat to civilians right now. The Ukrainians, of course, are there to protect Ukrainian civilians. So they will, I'm sure, try to utilize them only in military applications and only in places where it minimizes the threat to civilians coming in contact with them. They'll probably put some kind of screening around it so Ukrainians will eventually know where these munitions were deployed so they don't go in there. But then there will have to be a massive international effort to demine Ukraine when this is all done. And that, of course, is something that Ukraine wished would never happen, but they found themselves in this situation because Russia's choice to invade their country.
All right, Mick Mulroy, thank you.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.